Hey guys, I know many of you are going to really appreciate this interview today. I am with Shaun Moran over in Melbourne, Australia, and he has had a 10-year journey with MECFS where he tried everything under the sun to get better, spent all of his money on programs and therapies, including brain training, which he was convinced was going to be his answer. It all made a ton of sense to him, that whole autonomic nervous system component. And then even that didn't work for him, but he refused to give up and kept searching and eventually did find what his root causes were and found effective methods for addressing those things and is now fully recovered. You are going to absolutely love him. Please join me in welcoming Shaun Moran. Shaun, amazing to have you here today. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks very much for having me, Raelan. It's been a long time that I've been seeing you on YouTube and watching all your clips with all your inspirational stories and other people. So it's fantastic to finally be able to come over to your side.
It's such an amazing thing. The more and more people that I talk to, and I've been watching the videos and now I'm here doing my recovery story. It's just so exciting to see that kind of full circle thing. It's incredible. And I just think it's got to be all the more encouraging for people who are watching. This can happen. So how did this all start for you?
Oh, wow. I've got to go back probably 12 years ago now, actually. It was 2012. I'd, like many Australians, booked a one-way ticket to Europe and had planned to sort of work over there for about 6 months or so, maybe even longer. Life was sort of really what I was going to, make it to be. I had no real restrictions or commitments. And in sort of the months leading up to my departure, I started, I don't know, probably liken it to maybe a car that's just sort of running out of fuel. I just started sort of having periods where my body was just breaking down and, coming down with colds and flus quite often. And there were just some telltale signs there that my immune system just wasn't really working too well, and just sort of put it off as, oh, well, it is, whatever will be, we'll get through it. And about probably 6 to 8 weeks before I was meant to leave, I just completely started breaking down. I was working full time at the time, and I remember coming into work and just people commenting and saying, gee, are you okay to be here? You don't look very well today. And I sort of thought to myself, yeah, no, I'm fine, but I knew I wasn't. Eventually, over time, as the week sort of went on, I just got, more unwell. And it got to a stage where I was bedbound and I had to resign from my job. And this was only a few weeks before I was meant to leave. So I had to unfortunately cancel my trip. That was met with a lot of disappointment, particularly at my end, but with my best friend who I was going to travel with at the time. Yeah, it was a really scary period, and a lot of disappointment and upset, of course, and just that unknown of what's happening to my body, which I guess all of us in this situation feel when it's all beginning.
Yeah, it's a bit crazy. I always say it's a bit like being kidnapped from your own life. It's just, it's so intense and so scary and so confusing. And I can't even imagine having this amazing trip planned it on the horizon, like what a complete 180 you're doing from that. And so young too. What did you think was happening when this was going on?
I think that's probably the worst part, Raelan. You just don't know what's happening at the time. It's not like, as we all know, it's not like a typical condition, a visible condition, such as breaking your leg or, having some sort of other chronic condition, which is diabetes or something along those lines. You don't know what's going on. And it was only until I got a diagnosis, probably months later, that it sort of struck me as to what was happening. But again, at the time, probably not so much now, because there are channels like yours and there's a lot more information out there. But at the time, particularly here, there just wasn't any information about this condition. So I remember hearing about a footballer here that had it, and he was the only person I knew in Australia that had ever suffered from this condition. So he sort of gave me some hope and inspiration that I could turn things around, but I didn't think it was going to take 10 years.
So when you got your diagnosis, what was that?
Chronic fatigue syndrome.
Okay. And had you heard of it when you got that diagnosis?
I think just as a result of hearing that footballer who'd had it. But aside from that, I knew absolutely nothing about it.
And did they, along with that diagnosis, give you any sort of prognosis or treatment recommendations?
Yeah, good point. I guess at the beginning, having gone through the conventional medicine system, particularly at the beginning, the prognosis was not very good. Unfortunately, there just isn't a lot of knowledge about the condition and sort of beyond sort of management of symptoms, which I came to realize quite quickly. I ended up seeing probably one of the leading doctors here in Australia in this particular condition, and unfortunately, he didn't know why I was sick, and he was happy to prescribe me different things and give some recommendations, but ultimately just wasn't sure why I was unwell. And yeah, that's a little bit frightening at the time when you're obviously trying to go to experts to get that advice, but if you're coming out and they're not sure, it sort of leaves you feeling quite unsure as well, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like for most of us, we feel pretty powerless because you think this is an expert in the condition, and if they don't know what to do, how on earth am I supposed to figure it out? Figure it out while sick and exhausted and maybe having some cognitive symptoms. And it's like there's no way. There's just no, how am I going to do this?
Correct. Yeah, it's pretty scary at the time, and so I guess for that reason, it's probably, I guess, a bit of an impetus and a reason why people do start sort of reaching out and looking at different sources for information, online, YouTube, different sort of, yeah, sources out there to try and find out if there are any other ways or any other ideas or options that might be out there for people to utilize to try and turn the corner. So, yeah, it's a strange period.
And at this time for you, though, there wasn't a ton of information out there. So
Yeah.
what did you do?
Yeah, I went with what a lot of people would probably do in this situation, and that's just follow the recommendations of other people. Like you said, when you're sick and exhausted and your cognitive sort of ability is quite limited at the time, it's very hard to do your own research. And so, based on other people's recommendations, I tried a myriad of different therapies, sort of everything from IV drips and ozone therapy, Chinese medicine, essentially every therapy you've probably heard of. I did that over several years. And I mean, that was just a sign of my desperation to get my life back. I tried everything and everything. All my savings that I put together for the trip had just obviously been put to try to get better. So I tried everything and everything. And yeah, it was unfortunately in my circumstances, I had a little bit of improvement over a few years there, so much so that probably about 4 years in, I returned to part-time work, which still was really quite difficult, but at least I was making some sort of progress. But I just knew deep down I was just such a long way from being back to where I was, for the previous 23 years or so.
And I find it's a lot of people say, and this was my experience, when you're in that place of desperation and you're trying all these different things, it's hard to even know what's delivering results and what's not. Like, did you know what had given you some recovery to that point?
Not really, to be honest, because you're trying sometimes foolishly, like, or in desperation, so many different things at once that you don't actually know what's working and what isn't. Yeah, so no, you're absolutely right. Sometimes you just never know. And it's hard to measure your progress and what's actually helping or isn't.
Yeah. Okay, so you went back to work, and I'm going to guess that every day was still a struggle, but you're getting through. So were you still seeking out new treatments at this point, or what happened from there?
Yeah, I was. I was seeking out, again, just trying different things. As soon as one thing sort of hadn't worked, then I would just try something else and I was just going through that pattern. So I tried that, but yeah, there was some really tough periods where, sleep, my sleep was really quite poor and I was just getting through days. I don't even know how I was getting through some of those days. It was actually really probably quite, almost torture what I was putting myself through. But I guess it was sort of the alternative was to, I just was to remain in bed and not do much else. So I forced myself and I pushed myself, and probably not something that would be necessarily highly recommended. But after years of sort of being unable to work and feeling quite isolated for periods, it was something I just pushed myself through. But it was somewhat counterintuitive and probably not necessarily the best thing to do at the time either.
Yeah, I did something similar. I achieved a kind of partial recovery after trying a zillion things and then went back to work a little bit, and it was so hard. But there's also this feeling of like, I have to pay the bills and, I don't it's like, what do you do? And it's really tough to just completely step back from all of life. I mean, many people are forced to. Sometimes you're so sick that
Yep.
it doesn't matter. You're not getting out of bed no matter how many bills you have. But when you're in that a little bit of a recovery place, I feel like we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to push through.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, a lot of people who develop CFS, as we know, have that tendency to push themselves, type A personality sometimes. So yeah, it's not a surprise that people fall into that trap. But yeah, as you're right, sometimes bills need to be paid and there are life commitments and we put pressure on ourselves and it's not ideal, but yeah, unfortunately there's not much one can do sometimes.
So clearly, eventually, you started finding some things that really did work for you. So how did
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah, well, I sort of came full circle. I heard about functional medicine back in 2010, actually. Long time ago, I read a book by Dr. Mark Hyman, and it sort of opened up my eyes to this whole space, which I wasn't aware of previously. And when I actually got diagnosed, I sort of forgot about that area and tried sort of all these different therapies, which were sort of not quite in that sort of space. And so back in, I think it was 2018 or 19, I sort of remembered functional medicine and I reached out to a local practitioner and sort of underwent a gamut of different tests. And eventually, when I did the right tests, I found out that I'd had high levels of heavy metals and mycotoxins, which I hadn't known in sort of the 8 to 9 years preceding. So that was a bit of a revelation to me because it sort of gave me a bit of a reason for the way I was feeling for all these years and why I'd make a little bit of progress, but just ultimately was nowhere near where I knew I could get back to. And so, yeah, it was quite a period, and it was sort of like peeling the layers of an onion, really, because once I started to realize that toxins were a part of my picture, I then realized that infections were a part of my picture. So I eventually found out I had a staph infection or colonization called Marcons. And that was sort of starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And then I subsequently later on found out that I had like a chronic dental infection. So there were just all these sort of things working in the background that were just suppressing my immune system and just sapping the energy out of me. And it was just, yeah, it was a nice surprise, but quite a shock once I finally got all the data to find out, what was driving all this. But it also gave me a lot of hope because I realized, okay, there is a reason for why I'm feeling the way I am, and there is actually a pathway forward. So mixed feelings, but exciting probably for the most part as well.
It's crazy, isn't it? Because we get all these tests done and they come back normal, which is a relief, but also so disappointing. It's like something's clearly wrong. So some test somewhere someone has to tell me something, otherwise I don't know what to address. And I'm a bit like a broken record, but at one point I got a chronic Lyme disease diagnosis, and it was one of the best days of my whole journey with CFS. Like my depression lifted. I had a stack of Lyme disease books. I'm like, okay. Ultimately, I don't think that really was what was happening for me personally. But if there's something wrong, you want to know what it is. So it's like, okay, this is something. Now I know which
Correct.
direction to go.
Exactly right. And that was sort of years after I'd undergone so many tests and they all came back normal. And
Yeah.
so you have this association with testing and disappointment. And after 8 years to finally get some tests that are showing you what's going on, it was it was a relief. It was a relief. And it set the pathway for me to finally walk down and recover. So yeah, that was brilliant to do that.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to talk about this. I'm glad we're having this discussion because there's a lot of people that are finding recovery going strictly through dealing with their like mind body connection, autonomic nervous system, limbic system, and that's great for a lot of people. But I always say here, you need to do all the tests first. Like you need to rule out those structural abnormalities because if there is something like that going on in your body, it needs to be addressed. You're not going to brain train your way out of it, I don't think. So yeah,
No, I agree. I agree with you, Raelan. I had that exact experience. I underwent the brain training and did all that, and I thought logically that it made so much sense, and I know it helps so many people, and I'm really grateful that it does. I thought for me that was the answer, but it wasn't for me. There was other things that were going on. And like you said, all the brain retraining and all the nervous system work that one can do can't really pull, toxins out of your body or remove infections. So you just have to really dig and find out what's going on for you.
So once you found these infections and the heavy metals, what do you do about that? How did you address that?
Yeah, so again, same sort of thing, just a lot of online research, and I came across a practitioner who basically used to work with Dr. Chris Shade, who's the founder of Quicksilver Scientific over there, and I started learning about detoxification, cellular detoxification, and how incredibly important it is for us, particularly in this modern age, but also particularly for people with chronic illness, chronic fatigue aside, or the process of keeping ourselves healthy and helping, remove things that aren't meant to be there, that are burdening, our system from functioning optimally, was a big revelation for me. So learning about that process and also then working alongside someone to undergo that. So looking at all the different detoxification pathways and the drainage organs and setting myself on that path. So it took probably 2 years to really start to feel completely well. I was having that exponential recovery and having more days, where I felt better than not. But it's a process. And I guess when we've been unwell for many, many years, it takes time. And so, I had to learn or try and relearn the art of patience and go through that process. But, once I was doing that, combining it with trying to go after the infections, everything sort of came together and converged, and eventually I managed to get back to full health, which is ultimately just remarkable.
And I think that's another really important thing to shine a light on, because I think it's easy to zero in on these recovery stories where people get better in 2 weeks, or and it does happen, but rapid success is the exception, not the norm. Unfortunately, for most of us, it's going to take some time. But once you get on that right path, at least I found, because it took me about 1.5 years, 2 years to recover as well, but because I could see I was going the right direction, it's a really strong fuel for motivation to keep going. Like, that hope is there. Like, okay, I'm frustrated.
Correct.
It's taking freaking forever. And this is hard, really hard. But like, every month is a little bit better than the one before it. So.
Correct. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's a lesson for me. It's a lesson for everyone that, just because you're not recovering immediately, like, don't lose that hope. It can take time and you will get there. Sometimes it's just a case of trying to find out what's driving it for you, as opposed to the next person. And there are so many different causes for fatigue out there, and it's just finding out what it is for you, which is the key thing. And then once you sort of understand and appreciate that, then I think that pathway to healing becomes a lot clearer and ultimately a lot faster.
So I'm curious, during this time when you were actively working on your recovery and finally getting somewhere with it, on any given week or day, what sorts of activities or things were you doing that were supporting this recovery?
Yeah, so I guess I was doing just things to help my lymphatic system. So I was doing sort of trampolining and dry brushing, things like that. In terms of sort of the detoxification, so it was just a lot of liver support, just helping my liver, trying to perform optimally and make it less sluggish. So it was starting to try and bring these toxins out that I'd sort of been harboring for many, many years, getting my kidneys working really well, and taking binders. So they were basically there to help usher out the toxins, and particularly the heavy metals and the mycotoxins, and get them out of my system. But doing so in a really diligent and careful way, because a lot can go wrong when you're detoxifying and not doing it properly. I probably naively tried to do some of this on my own at the beginning and learned a pretty tough lesson early on that you don't DIY this, especially when you're dealing with a lot of neurotoxins and a lot of problematic toxins. It's not a wise idea to do it on your own. I think it takes careful consideration and doing things in the right order, and doing them properly. And a combination of binders and helping sort of my drainage organs, and just helping my overall system to try and purge what had been holding me down for so long.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's it can be a lot, and if you do too much too fast, I believe it can actually have the reverse effect because if you
Yeah,
start mobilizing all these things in your body and it can't deal with them, it's you're just going to feel really crappy for a while, and then they're just going to kind of resettle, and you're going to have to start all over.
that's exactly what happened to me.
Yeah, I did something similar. I went once to this 4 week kind of, I mean, it was supervised. It was the place was run by a doctor, but just I think they called it a rejuvenation center, but it was intense. I did a 3 week green juice fast. I was doing colonics and like hot cold baths and lymphatic drainage massage. And I got just a place where I was so sick that I should have had the good sense, but someone's finally like, we got to pull the plug on this. Like, you're a mess. But you're so desperate. And then also in the
Correct.
whole world of detoxification, like I say a lot on this channel, it's confusing because you hear about the Herxheimer reaction and the diaphragm reactions are like, oh, if you feel bad, you're getting better. But you're like, but how bad is okay? And when does bad just mean I'm getting worse? And it's a lot. It's a lot to
It
know.
is.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. There's so many things going on. And yeah, sometimes you might think you're doing the right thing, but you're not. And you're potentially making yourself more unwell. So the big lesson there that it's a really powerful process, but just need to do it in the right order and do it really carefully.
So you've had such a long journey with this and you've tried so many different things and seen, different doctors and different, alternative people. From your perspective, are there things that are overlooked or what are some of the barriers for people recovering when they're facing these conditions?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people over the years, I've started to learn that so many homes have water damage. Particularly, I think in America, it's sometimes I hear 1 in 3 or 1 in 2 homes in America have water damage, and I think mold is a big problem. It actually was a big problem in my case, and I wasn't aware of it. I actually sort of regressed quite significantly back in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic when we were sort of at home all the time, and unbeknownst to me, I was sitting underneath my HVAC for several months and getting really, really unwell. It was only after I had a building biologist come out and tell me that my HVAC was completely riddled with mold. And so that was the prime reason why I was becoming so unwell. And it was right underneath my nose and well, right above me. And I didn't know that. So I think it's such an insidious thing and it can make people so unwell. And it can bring about so many neurological symptoms and fatigue and autoimmune. It's just implicated in so many different conditions. So I think it's something that I personally overlooked, but I've started to see, so many other people for which it's affected. Just the importance of making sure you're not living in an environment that's sort of plagued by mold, because you're just not going to get better from any condition, really, any chronic condition, if you're being constantly exposed to mycotoxins. They're just so damaging and harmful to the body. So I think that's something that sometimes we overlook because naturally you think your home is a haven. It's somewhere that's meant to be safe and, you feel protected. But unfortunately, sometimes, it can harbor these sort of things and make us pretty unwell. So I think that might be something if someone is going through that journey in the early stages, just to make sure that it's not a problem for you. I then thought back to when I first became unwell and I actually was living with my father at the time who was in a water damaged home. But I hadn't put those pieces of the puzzle together for probably a good 9 years. So yeah, it can be a bit of a problem for people.
And there are lots of places that specialize in just coming to your home and doing testing for all of this. And I know I had it done on my home, and at the time, at least, it was fairly reasonably priced. So, yeah, there are ways to figure this out. And definitely, many people that I've interviewed have talked about how addressing this has been a key part of their recovery. So that's for sure a good call out.
Yeah, yeah.
So for people watching right now that are currently still in this and going through it, what are some of the key things you want to say to them, or what suggestions would you have?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is I think community is a big thing. It's probably something that I overlooked. I probably didn't reach out to as many people in the CFS space or the ME space that I probably could have. I think that would have really helped. And I've noticed that with other people that feeling that you're not alone is such a big part of hope and feeling okay throughout the day. I think it's such an isolating condition at the best of times. To feel even more isolated, I think it's just not ideal for someone. So I think trying to remain connected with other people is probably something I would suggest as being really helpful. I think the other big thing is, I know everyone will probably say it, but not losing hope. There are people that have recovered after, 30 years of battling this condition. In my case, it was 10. You just can't have that flame be extinguished. And I think some of the best ways to do that, and for me, the best way was just to keep digging and finding out what it is for you that's driving your symptoms. Unless you're born with this condition or you have a genetic condition, I feel that for most people, recovery is completely possible. And at the very least, people can get a lot better. You just have to keep unpeeling the layers of the onion and find out what it is for you that's causing your symptoms. So if you keep doing that, I think that's naturally going to fuel hope, and it's going to naturally fuel that sense that I can recover. So yeah, not giving up hope and continuing to find what your causes are, I think, is one of the biggest needle movers to get past this.
Yeah, I think it's the single most important thing that you can do is just not give up. It's just with anything in life. Borrow hope from other people if you need it, if you're lacking it on some days. But yeah, just find your ways to keep going.
Correct.
And you now support other people who are going through this. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I am, Raelan. I always thought throughout this whole decade that once I got better, I was going to make something positive come from this. I thought this didn't just happen to me for any other reason, and it would just be just a real shame if I just got on with my life and didn't make anything positive come out of this. I suffered for many, many years, but I think that there's always something to be grateful for, or something to focus on, something positive that can come from a dark place. And in my situation, I always made a commitment to myself that I would try and help other people after I got through the other side and make something good come from what was a pretty dark period for me. So I have put together an online course which sort of outlines, in my view, what are the key drivers of the condition. It focuses on the physiological and also the sort of other reasons, such as, the nervous system sort of things and other stress and psychological sort of components to it. But I'm doing that, and I'm also starting some coaching as well at the moment with people to helping with identify their causes or putting them in the right direction to try and find how they can learn their causes, and also being a support person for people who are feeling isolated and unwell and need someone to speak to who can truly understand it, because I think that can go a long way to feeling understood and heard, because unfortunately a lot of us in this situation don't feel like that for lengthy periods of time, and I don't think people should have to suffer alone.
I think that's absolutely amazing. There are so many people who need support with this in the world, and everyone's going to have a different approach or a different person or just a different take on it that's going to resonate for them. So just so amazing that you're out here now sort of paying it forward and helping other people as well. And for those of you watching, you can expand the video description, and all the links that you need to find. Well, everything you need to know about Shaun will be there. And if his story, his journey resonates for you, I really encourage you just to click on those links and check it out, because he clearly is an amazing person. He's been through it. He gets it, has a lot of insight, and has a lot to offer. Thank you, Shaun, for doing this today. I really, really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure, Raelan. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. Oh, and quick member shout out to Ben Mariano. Thank you so much for joining the channel. Really appreciate the support. And for those of you watching, Shaun talked about having support on this journey. And if you're already a part of it, I do have a Facebook group that is linked in the video description. And what people say they love about this is that it's really optimistic and recovery focused and just a supportive place to be. So if you don't have anyone in your life to connect with, this could be a good place to find someone. Right. Thank you again, Shaun. Thank you to all of you watching. Hang in there. You have totally got this. Wishing you all the best. Sending big hugs to you. And yeah, hope to see you in the next interview.